26th monthly forum that we have been conducting at the Huntington Public Library. I'm astounded at that number myself, actually. And my name is David Spritzen with the Long Island Progressive Coalition, and I'm particularly excited today for our program, which constitutes truly, in fact, the rebirth of democratic socialism on Long Island. As someone who has been a member of the DSA since its founding, since I was involved with its founding, which was 1981, it has been impossible until very recently to create a viable democratic socialist chapter on Long Island. I know because I tried, and I failed. All right? So to see these two chapters, from Nassau, one in Nassau and one in Suffolk County, emerge very recently with a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and constituted mostly by people, I would say, under 30, by and large. It is an extremely exciting phenomenon, more or less.
Now 30 is under 30.
But so it is really fantastically exciting. The younger people are here and elder people are out there, but that's encouraging. So with having said that, we're going to turn this program over first to the Nassau chapter representatives, and they'll introduce themselves, and then to the Suffolk chapter representatives, and hopefully we will have sufficient time for an emotional and energetic dialogue. And we have to be out here at 9 o'clock, so that gives us basically an hour and 45 minutes. So having said that, Nassau chapter.
Okay, shall I just? So, hello, my name is Melissa. I am the co-chair of the Nassau County chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. And this is my PowerPoint. If it works. Ooh, that's a question. There we go. So, I think this is causing more issues. There we go. So we were officially chartered in May of this year, although, as he just mentioned, we had a DSA semi-active in the 90s. So we are the branch of the Democratic Socialists of America that is active in Nassau. Our membership is growing in every meeting. We have about 50 active members at our last meeting, and our mailing list goes up to 200 different people. As I mentioned, I'm a member of the steering committee. The steering committee is a group of 7 people who leads the chapter. We have 2 co-chairs, a treasurer, a social media chair, and 2 organizers, and 1 secretary. And Democratic Socialists of America is a social organization. We're not a political party. So we don't run candidates. That said, we do seek to influence electoral politics. We just don't run candidates ourselves. So, as far as what we believe, we consider ourselves to be a big tent left organization. So that means that we have members from everyone who might consider themselves on the left, which includes people who are like Bernie liberals, to Trotskyists, to anarchists, people who don't care about anything I just said. That includes me. But many of us were energized by the 2016 election and a lot of the things that happened since, from the Bernie campaign to the election of Donald Trump to the recent Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez victory. And a lot of us have been kind of disillusioned and fed up with the Democratic Party and the kind of politics that it offers, which is why we turned to DSA. So this is a statement of DSA National on what we believe. I think that's a bit wordy, so I boiled it down to a chart. So we have things that we believe are good and things that we believe are bad. On the bad side, we have capitalism. On the good side, we have socialism. We'll deal with that one more in a second. As socialists, we consider ourselves against all forms of oppression, whether that be racism, sexism, and we are for the liberation of all people. We don't consider ourselves to be like brocialists who just think that capitalism is everything. We think that everything matters. We're also like not Stalinists. We don't like dictatorship. We are also eco-socialists. We believe that we have to look towards green solutions to our planet. And we also don't necessarily believe in big government control of your life. Rather, we believe that people need to have true personal freedom that comes with having the actual material ability to access freedoms. As a kind of example to that, we believe that people have a right to health care. We do not necessarily believe that people have the right to access affordable health care options. We believe just a right to health care, period, end of sentence. So, that's a very brief overview, but you might be asking now, what is socialism? Is socialism China? Is it Venezuela? Is it Norway? Is it just FDR all over again? I don't think so. I don't really agree with any of those. I think that most of the people here tonight are probably consider themselves at least socialist curious. So I'm not going to address the criticisms of like, well, won't we just end up like Venezuela? Because I think that probably most of you understand that we're talking about a different thing. Rather, I'm going to focus a little bit on like what separates us from the Democratic Party, and which is also, I think, a big part of our membership boost. So socialism at its core is about democratic control of the economy, which means what to produce, how to produce, where to produce it, and what to do with those profits. It's different from liberalism. Liberalism is a word that gets tossed around a lot, and so does socialism. So for the purposes of this and how we kind of talk about it on the left, I'm going to be using liberal to mean like FDR and that kind of like social democratic stuff, and left to refer to everything to the left of that. So with that out of the way, I'm going to give an extremely brief history of liberalism. So first we had this guy. He did a lot of good stuff. Made the New Deal a lot of great social programs. His goal was, as he said at the time, to save capitalism from itself. He saw that we were in a depression that capitalism had caused, and that many people at the time were saying capitalism needed to be overthrown. FDR said, well, if we stop that, we can have something approaching the middle. And that was the history of democratic politics for a good 30, 40 years, including this guy who added more programs such as Medicare and Medicaid. But then we start having problems when we reach this guy. And he starts to dismantle a lot of the gains that all of the previous liberal reformers had done. He has welfare reform, which mostly just ends up destroying these programs, which is then continued by this guy in a great betrayal, continuing those quote-unquote reforms and just continuing to dismantle the legacy of the New Deal and the Fair Deal. And then in the 2000s, of course, we had this man who attempted to destroy the last little bit that was left, Social Security, which was largely untouched. He failed in that. And then we had this guy who for once wanted to like stop cutting things, instead add on to it in giving us healthcare. And he succeeded to an extent, although I think almost no one really loves Obamacare, but he did succeed, at least until 2016 when the Antichrist came, and then we don't have healthcare anymore, or at least they're trying very hard. So what's the point of that brief history of liberalism? To me, what that says is that liberal reforms are just inherently unstable. The reason that the New Deal failed and that all of these programs have been dismantled is because while they were good programs, they left in place the structure of capitalism that was then used to destroy them. So it left a large portion of, it left a very small number of people with a concentration of a large amount of wealth. And more importantly, it left the decision of what to do with that wealth and how to put it to any purpose in their hands. So the concentration of money in their hands means that they still had power even after these reforms that were supposed to cut into their power went into place. So that's a defining feature of capitalism, and that is the thing that as socialists we point to as something that needs to be overturned and destroyed, because we think that the function of the economy should be to serve everyone in it, rather than having those decisions commanded by a small number of people in a boardroom God knows where. Yeah. So, democratic socialism. So we are obviously the Democratic Socialists of America. To me, what that means is that we want to achieve socialism through democratic means. We want a world where capitalism is eliminated, but we want to do that through a democratic kind of process. We want to administer the economy by people, for people. We seek a society where there is not extreme poverty, and there's also not billionaires either, because in our view of the world, those two things are inextricably linked. You cannot have one without the other. And we also believe in the right of all people to live a dignified existence, period, end of sentence. So with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about Nassau County's chapter specifically. Those are our goals. It is very ambitious for us to say we're a little organization in Nassau County. We started 2 months ago, and we're going to overthrow capitalism. That's a little ambitious, but to me, one of the attractive things about DSA is that we marry the big ambition to small, more practicable goals. So we do what we can, where we can. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about our current working groups and the organizations that they do. Our current working groups are healthcare, housing, and immigration, and we also have a political education committee. So healthcare, this is, I think, probably our oldest group. Has been going on since longer than we've existed, definitely. One of our biggest things is campaigning for the New York Health Act, which would achieve single-payer status in New York. Will probably be voted on early next year. We have been canvassing the districts of state senators in Long Island in order to get them to vote for this act. Now, some of you are probably thinking, didn't you just criticize reforms like the New York Health Act sounds like? And the answer to that is yes. But again, this comes back to being practicable in things, and we see the New York Health Act and single-payer healthcare as something that will do a massive good to so many people's lives and will also help to weaken the strength of the capitalist class on everyone else, because everyone in this room, I'm assuming, knows someone who hated a job they had, really wanted to leave it, but didn't because they had really good health care. That's a very common thing, and as long as that is true, as long as we don't have a single-payer healthcare system, that is a very strong thing that the capitalist class has. In addition to that, there's also a mighty equalizing effect of this. As an organization that wants to promote, or rather wants to eliminate oppression in all of its forms, we can't ignore the fact that disabled people are disproportionately hurt by the way our healthcare system currently operates, and overturning it will be a great boon to them. So next is our housing working group. Our current campaign in the housing group is the land bank. So Nassau County has this land bank, which is basically all of the houses that were foreclosed on during the economic crisis of about 10 years ago. It's still holding on to many of these properties, and it hasn't done anything with them. Our goal with this group is to do something with them to serve a useful social purpose, as opposed to what will probably eventually happen if we don't do anything, which is for them to just flip them to some real estate company for a couple bucks. So some of the ideas that we have had on that purpose are, back a second, some of the ideas that we've had, for example, are to turn them into Wi-Fi farms or turn them into public spaces, just something to use for the public good. In terms of future things that we want to do, Nassau County has some of the highest housing inequality and some of the most unaffordable housing in the entire country, and we definitely want to address that in the future. Again, we reach the question of how is this socialism? One, we believe that housing is a human right, and two, we believe that that we have real estate that has been developed and it ought to be put to use for the community that it's in. And finally, immigration justice. This is very new. We only proposed this one about last meeting, so it's less than a month old. Nassau County has been a hotbed for ICE activity because Trump has made his big stand against MS-13 in Nassau County. And that means that there has been a crisis for the Latino community around here. So some of the things that we want to do is we want to assist in rapid response for immigration and help stall people's deportations as long as we can. We also have a campaign that is in the beginning stages of finding out New York or Long Island businesses that are supporting ICE and getting them to drop their support of ICE with the goal of eventually, as my comrade shirts say, abolishing ICE.
If you like this shirt and you like abolishing ICE, you
Yeah.
Yes.
For years, only $20.
Yes. And again, just to get back to the question of how is this advancing socialism, as we see ourselves as against all oppression, we see the actions of ICE and we see racism. And we see something that really needs to be destroyed. As we're committed to racial justice, this is something that is very, very close to our hearts as democratic socialists. And finally, we have our Political Education Committee. This hosts regular book discussions and film screenings. Its goal is to educate the members of Nassau County to keep us, educated on current topics. Another project that we have is the Lending Library, which is within our chapter. We have a bunch of books on a bunch of different topics that we lend to each other for use, and they return them at the next meeting. Yeah. And again, this is to keep us engaged with both theory and practice, so that we're not just striking out in the dark. As far as other actions, we helped campaign for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Maybe you've heard of her. We've also had socials on a semi-regular basis. We've gone to the beach as socialists. We've had a drinking night as socialists. There's also a Young Democratic Socialist chapter at Hofstra who is affiliated with Nassau County. And we are in the early stages now of starting a statewide association, partially growing out of conversations that have been had about whether or not we should endorse Cynthia Nixon and what to do about her and her campaign. We've been discussing about forming a statewide DSA that can make decisions on a statewide level.
They pissed us off that New York City decided to endorse without our say-so. So we were like, well, Long Island's got to represent.
Yep.
Nothing about us without us.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, and with that, I'm finished.
We're all sitting up. We're from the Suffolk County chapter of DSA. My name is Jordan Helene. I'm an organizer there. This is Mariana Pineda, who is another organizer, and Andrew Dobbin, who's our treasurer.
The proper socialist cash chief. I'm the chief of the cash of the socialists, and we're going to use that to pick out the capital's trash.
And we neglected to introduce ourselves. My name is Matt. I'm the treasurer of Nassau DSA, and I see William.
Wasn't sure if I should just sit myself in the back here, so that's what I chose.
Feel free to join us.
Chair, come on up.
William is our.
Or don't. You don't have to. You don't want to.
Is one of our organizers on the steering committee. And.
I'm Marianne. I run the reading group.
I'm also the chair of our Healthcare Justice Working Group, so if you are interested in getting involved with making single payer a reality in New York State, talk to me. Okay. Yeah, and actually, if you are interested in getting involved, we do have membership forms for the national organization. That one's ugly. Here, or you can do so digitally on the website. We'll have the link up at the end. And if you just want to sign up, not as a dues-paying member, but just to get involved, to get on our email list, just get invited to events, we're going to pass around a sign-in sheet, okay? We've got.
We've got you from years back.
We also have our pamphlets up here. Anyone can take one. Talks a bit about us.
Okay. Oh. Did the arrow or the space bar?
Space bar.
Okay, it's on a PowerPoint. Open.
Yeah.
All right, we help.
Perfect.
All right, so socialism became a big buzzword when Bernie Sanders ran for office. I volunteered with his campaign. I was really excited about him, but he's not a socialist. He has some good ideas. He's got a pretty good platform, but he's not a socialist. Now we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which lots of people have seen in the news, and there's still people going, is she really a socialist? And I know when I get into fights with people on social media, they like to post this. The dictionary definition of socialism, and fight with me about that. I don't know if you've ever had this wonderful encounter, or maybe you people go to bed at not 1 a.m., 4 a.m., So what does socialism mean to you? When you hear socialism, what do you think? Anybody? I'm a teacher, I will call on you.
Class participation. Joseph Stalin.
Fairness.
Okay, great. Anybody else?
Sharing equally.
Great. Jordan? Go away.
Go away.
Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about what democratic socialism actually is. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew.
Yeah. So our comrades in Nassau sort of covered a lot of this, so we're going to go through this section a little more quickly. This is the 2 paragraphs that will always be shoved down your throat if you ever come up to a DSA meeting and ask, what does socialism mean? Because it is on our little mission statement, and we can just copy paste and hand it to you, and that is why we always will be showing it. But it does a good job of sort of summing up what we're about. We reject an international economic order built on private property, built on alienated labor, built on discrimination, environmental destruction, brutality, all the bad things. And we want to build a humane world, basically organized around human dignity and organized around sort of democratic agency over your life and over your community's life, right? So what does that mean, essentially? Well, the most important thing is we mean that we want a world where everyday people have economic, social, and political sort of control over their lives, right? Right now, you don't have control over your life. And I will demonstrate this in a very quick and simple test. Who here has a job? Who here hates their job? Yeah. Why do you hate your job, person over there?
It's not fun.
Why do you keep going there if it's not fun? Exactly, right? You got to get paid. You have to sell your labor to somebody in order to survive. And it doesn't start there, right? Even your ostensibly democratic government that you vote for is not all that democratic, right? I mean, most town elections, you've got, in Suffolk County, for example, you've got this reptile by the name of Rick Schaefer who makes sure that, you know, Republicans will run here and Democrats will run there, and, you know, I've got a deal for you, you know, it's a great situation, you know, and in that way, there's no real democratic competition of any real sense in many levels of government. And if you do want to hold them accountable, well, they'll probably hold their town meeting at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday while everybody's working, and the air conditioning will break down except for them or something like that, right? So what we want is a real, genuine democratic society where you actually have real say over your life in a more robust sense. And this means that you have democratic control of the economy. It means that we are seeking to eliminate all forms of kind of what we call interpersonal domination. That's bigotry based on race, sex, class, gender identity, your physical, mental abilities, etc. and so forth, right? All that has got to go. Now, of course, as our comrade said, we also believe in sort of transitional reforms, things that will help us in the middle period, like single payer. But those are steps, right? The end goal is to bring about a fully humane and democratic society for everybody. So, how is DSA structured nationally? You want to take this, Jordan?
I do, and I just want to mention one thing too about what we want and how we're going to get there, because we keep using the word democracy, we keep using the word democratic. Sure. That's probably a good idea. We keep using the word democracy, we keep talking about things being democratic. I just want to make sure we're on the same page just about something. Does being democratic mean voting? Is that all there is to democracy? Or is there more to democracy than just choosing leaders periodically? We think there's much more to democracy than just choosing leaders periodically, and so when we talk about democratic participation, we talk about these transitional reforms, it's meant to free people up so that they can actually make decisions in the economy and the decisions that affect their lives, because right now a lot of working people just spend all their time working to get by. So that's part of democracy for us. How are we structured nationally? Well, the organization overall nationally has 47,000 members. It was 46 last week, it was 45 the week before that, it was 40 a few weeks before that. It is a growing organization. There are over 100 local chapters, and there's a national office that sort of coordinates between these chapters. There's a national political committee, a 16-person group that is sort of like the elected leadership of the DSA in terms of making decisions between conventions. The conventions represent everybody in the organization. That's the highest level of decision making. Most work happens at the chapter levels, but there are some national working groups like the Socialist Feminist Working Group, the Medicare Working Group, labor, legal, etc., to coordinate issues around specific priorities. The national priorities, for example, are elections, Medicare for all, and labor. How is it structured locally? Well, locally there are chapters, like the Suffolk County chapter, like the Nassau County chapter. These are, local organizations of people that try to organize in their towns, in their counties, in their constituencies. It's where 90% of the organizing happens, so to speak, rough figure. Local chapters cover an exclusive geographic area and are highly autonomous from national. National can't really tell you what to do. They give you priorities and support, but you basically choose directions in the chapters. And because our organizations are run democratically, and as I said, democratically means more than just picking your leader every now and then, the membership really decides where to go. The membership is almost like the legislature of these organizations. And if you want to try to organize something in DSA, you can go for it. Get people together, say we want to organize to work around this sort of stuff, and if the chapter will support you, then you have that backing and you can just take the initiative on that. You're not waiting for somebody to get into office and do something for you. And most chapters have something called a steering committee or some other leadership group that basically exists to sort of oversee work, coordinate things, speak for the chapter between meetings, and handle various different necessary business functions. So Nassau went over its campaigns. We want to go over our working groups and campaigns. We have an electoral working group that just started up to try and influence electoral politics by providing a guide, a voter guide, to try and give people more information about candidates, because right now I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily vote because they don't necessarily know who is even on the ballot, who's worth voting for. We also want to go into referendums and things like that. We have a healthcare justice working group that pursues a single payer campaign that's going to be doing naloxone training. That is a chemical compound that can save someone an opioid overdose. We might be doing CPR and first aid training, and we are definitely doing that. We are definitely doing that. And as a goal, we want to do medical debt clinics to help people deal with the massive amounts of medical debt that our wonderful capitalist healthcare system saddles us with. We also have a solidarity action working group that sort of gets involved in direct mutual aid programs. We're going to be doing a number of brake light clinics. The idea behind a brake light clinic is that an out tail light or brake light is a very common cause for a police stop, which can mean getting fined, which can mean losing a lot of money, wasting time in court. It can also mean, if you are black, that you might get shot in an interaction with police, because that happens quite frequently in this country. If you are an immigrant and you don't have a valid documentation status, you might end up getting deported and handed over to ICE. So we want to kind of reduce the amount of interaction people have with the police with this. We've also been trying to support justice for Keenan and Anthony. These are two young black men who were murdered by a white man who thought he had stolen their dirt bikes. They had stolen his dirt bikes. Not that it matters, but they didn't. We want to make sure that there is an actual penalty applied as opposed to a slap in the wrist. There's a big court action on August 2nd, and we can talk about that later.
At 9 a.m. if you don't work a normal 9-to-5 job.
Yes, if you don't work a normal 9-to-5, it's at 9 a.m. on August 2nd. That's next Thursday. We want to pack the course.
Next slide.
Right.
Jordan, question?
Yes.
Where is that?
It'll be on the upcoming event. Next slide.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Justice for Keenan and Anthony, First District Court in Central Islip at 9 a.m.
If you know where the Ducks Stadium is, it's that giant building next to the Long Island Ducks Stadium. You literally cannot.
Well, that's the federal court. So
okay.
The court is,
The white building, the big fancy architecture one, that's the federal building. This is in the smaller, less fancy brick building right next to it.
Yeah. All this information is available on our Facebook page. We have the contact information on our brochures and our business cards. There's a Families Belong Together Immigration Justice Rally this Saturday as well. On Sunday, Nassau County's canvassing for New York Health Act. Saturday, August 4th, we have a Healthcare Justice Working Group meeting to plan the next healthcare justice actions. We hope to get a lot of people showing up to that. And we're doing our first brake light repair on Sunday, August 5th. There's even more. Training, yes, to learn how to actually do the repairs. On Monday, August 6th is the chapter steering committee for Suffolk, and on August 12th is another brake light repair.
I just want to jump in for a hot second. So our steering committee meetings are open to all DSA members because we don't believe in this, behind closed door decision making. We believe in full participation. So any members are welcome to come and participate in the steering committee meetings.
Right.
So we're like the opposite of Rip Schaefer in the Suffolk County.
Can you make it a little more clear what is a brake light repair?
Sure. The idea behind brake light repair is that having a tail light or a brake light that's broken is a common cause of a traffic stop, which can lead to a lot of dire consequences in interactions with the police. So we want to basically, as a service to community, free repair of people's brake lights to reduce the amount of interaction with the police people have, to reduce the consequences of being pulled over, the possible interactions that, if you have been paying attention could lead to some pretty dire things.
Yeah, so the trainings are to teach you how to repair brake lights so that when we have our clinics, we're doing one at the Sisters of St. Joseph in Brentwood, we're doing one at Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal in Wyandanch, and then we're still looking for a church in Amityville to host a third. And if you know of any areas, any communities that could host one of these events, please let us know. This is a free service that we offer to the community. We will fix your brake light for free.
We raised a buttload of money for it, so we can kind of do this until it's too cold to feel your fingers.
Yeah, and so these are the trainings so that if you don't have mechanical skills, you can come and learn how to do that so that then you can go and help out your community members by doing it for them.
All right. Right, so other events on August 18th, Suffolk chapter is having its 1-year anniversary, a picnic potluck. And on August 25th, we're having our chapter meeting. These are our regular meetings of the membership that, sort of make decisions about where we're going to be going. We're also going to be talking about steering committee elections there. Okay.
Mariana, finish it up.
All right, sounds great. Yes? You all love it? Yes?
Yes.
All right, sign up. Okay, so this is the URL. If you just Google join the DSA, it'll take you to it. We have the paper membership forms
Bring up the
there.
membership form, I'll bring it right over to you.
Okay. And otherwise, you can do it right from your phone. There are different levels of membership. If you want to be a dues-paying member, we have a new thing called monthly dues. If you sign up for monthly dues, then the chapter, whether it's Nassau County or Suffolk County, will get a share of your monthly dues. If you just do like an annual contribution, we don't get a piece of that, but if you sign up for monthly recurring dues, even at like $10 a month, we will get a percentage of that.
$5 a month.
Woohoo! Here are the email addresses for Nassau County and Suffolk County. We are on Facebook for both chapters. We are on Twitter for both chapters. And once you do sign up, we have something called Slack, which is a secure message board kind of thing that we can very easily teach you how to use on your cell phone, on your computer. That way, if you're not a social media person, it's still a safe way to communicate and find out about activities. Yeah? All right. And if you are a college student, okay, we have a chapter at SUNY Stony Brook, we have a chapter at Hofstra, and coming soon, Malloy College. Woo!
The end.
Yay!
Oh, great. Now, does people have any questions, comments, discussion? Let's start. Let's go from. I always start with my left. If that's okay.
I have a question for the comrades from Nassau.
Yes.
The comrades from Nassau, do you have any particular nation in the world that is serving for you as a model? You would like to be like them?
Certainly, plenty of members use the Nordic states as something closer to the ideal, but how we would categorize that is, as my comrade from Nassau, Melissa, has said, would fall under the category of social democratic welfare state reforms, and it's more robust and certainly more ideal in the Nordic states because not like here, the bottom has not dropped out. You have a bottom, you have safe free health care, and you can certainly live a more dignified life. Yet, is there one nation in the world right now that is wonderfully socialist and the ideal we strive for? No, unfortunately, we live under a global hegemonic order. We live under global capitalism, and that shapes our world. Our ideology is born of we're not looking to countries, we're looking to theory and practice more than we're looking to emulate any state. Is that?
I don't know if it'll reach me, but
You can go.
I'll just speak. I don't need that.
Okay.
Okay, so it can reach me.
Yes.
Can you hear me? All right, whatever. So I have a very good book called Building the Commune by a gentleman by Professor named Mayer. He teaches at Indiana University, and he was talking about a lot of misconceptions about socialism, especially in the nation of Venezuela. Other than what the media usually tells you, Chavez built a very robust system down there during his brief time as president, and that's sort of the system, at least for myself. I'm not going to speak for anybody else here in DSA other than myself right now, that I look to, because I think that when you look at the system of like building up, the poor and the working class, redistributing wealth, especially the oil wealth from Venezuela, and diversifying the economy and getting the workers to be active members of the community, active members in their workplace, and you see that and you say like, well, that's something that we could do here. We can build our communities, we can build our workplaces that are more participatory, more democratic, and more representative. And especially when it comes to electoral politics, we could have ways of representing us, not through just electing people from the community, but also members from our workplaces too, where we have actual people who've done the work, who have those technical skills and knowledge, that they can represent us when decisions are being made for legislation. So I think that's about it.
Oh, we can just take another question. This is good to leave other questions.
I would do it real quick to that. One of the largest companies in all of Spain is the Mundo Cooperative Federation, which is a democratically controlled company. So, it's not a question of have we found a perfect thing we can copy? No, but there are plenty of good examples.
All right, so we had a question back here?
Yeah.
Comment?
So, I've been voting for over 40 years, but I've never voted in the primary because I've never joined the party. So, I think there's a pox on both houses, certainly. And I'm curious to understand, certainly everything that you put up on the screen, who could argue with it? Apple pie, mom, that's wonderful. I get the what, but what I didn't hear is the how. I think the one fellow from Suffolk, you sort of touched on that briefly, but I'm going to paraphrase civic engagement, and I think that's what you were talking about, was civic engagement. Because if it's just going to be a new slate of policies without engagement, then you're not going to get off of first base. And I'm curious to understand the idea of a democratic control of the economy and production. That gives me pause just to hear it. So two things, if you could walk me through how that looks, and then help me to understand what it is that you'll do, how you would hope to walk through that, to get through that, and also how you intend to gain increase civic engagement and participation, because a top-down approach will not work.
I'm going to start answering this because I think there's one thing that we did not talk about that neither chapter is focusing on right now, that I think eventually we will have to focus on, because I think you cannot have a left and you cannot have socialism ever unless you work with a strong labor movement. And that is where both chapters, and I'm a dedicated member of the Nassau chapter, but that is a huge gap in both chapters right now, and at least in the presentations. So I think one of the ways that you enact some of the ideas here and you turn them from theory into practice is through, and certainly this was mentioned, but it wasn't put up in the slides, is working with working people to strengthen, for example, labor unions, right? Because what do we need in the U.S.? We need better wages, right? We need safer working conditions. We need shorter work days. I mean, we can create all of the possibilities for democratic participation, but if people aren't making a livable wage, even if they're not getting their health care on the job, they still have to work incredible hours and can't, so we bread and roses too, right? So that's, I think, one of the ways that we enact socialism, is that we build links to labor unions. We work for workplace democracy, because we absolutely cannot have a left, and particularly in a post-Janus world, right, where the very existence, the economic underpinnings of labor, particularly in the public sector, are threatened right now. We absolutely have to create positive links with working people and organizations that, whether they're unions or not, whether the workers are unionized or not. So I think one of the ways we do that is to build coalitions with people and work with them on the job and through the organizations that represent them, because nobody as a working person is able to bargain for him or herself individually, right? We need to strengthen collective bargaining and all of those other things. And elections alone and democratic participation in a Nassau or a Suffolk chapter alone will not substitute for a vibrant labor movement.
I want to say that I 100% agree with what we just heard about the limitations of some of the things we talked about. Solidarity Action Working Group actually began as a labor support group. We began by going to walk the picket line with striking workers at meat farms, and that's something I definitely want to get back into because that's 100% correct. The bottom-up organizing you're talking about, the sort of expansive democracy I'm talking about, it includes things like organizing workers to fight in their workplaces, to have control over the workplaces through a labor union and beyond that. So I don't want to, that's part of what I touched on in terms of, democracy is more than just voting, because you're right. Just offering people candidates and asking them every now and then which one they like best, that's not going to build a movement, that's not going to give people real democracy. That's why we focus so much on building these chapters, these democratic institutions and localities where the members make decisions. They're little laboratories in democratic self-governance because we elect officials within the chapter, but those officials ultimately go to the chapter for permission to do everything. It's up to people to take initiative to make these sorts of movements run, and that's what we want to offer people, and that's what we want to build out. When you have an organization of people who know that they have the right and the ability to plan things, to organize things, to direct their lives, that can be very powerful, whether or not you ever cast a vote. As to workplace democracy, as the idea of democratic control over production, it takes a number of forms. That's some of the most basic socialist things imaginable. And the reason why a lot of people, I think about socialism as this big government control over things is because one way of thinking about it is a democratic government controlling the economy. That's not necessarily the only way to do it. That's not necessarily the way I'd be most excited about. But the thing to think about workplace democracy is that for a very long time in history, the idea of people making political decisions was considered ridiculous. But we make political decisions all the time whenever there's a referendum. I think that workplaces can run the same way, and there are indeed models of workplaces running the same way. I think, Andrew, you mentioned
Mundo.
Yeah, in Spain. But there are companies, successful companies that are worker-owned and worker-directed. You can look up the John Lewis Company in England as an example of that. It's not common because the thing about operating business in a capitalist society is people do it to make money. You need a lot of startup capital. You need to borrow that from a bank, and you typically want a return on that investment. You don't want anyone else telling you what to do. That's one of the reasons why capitalism is ultimately so dictatorial. It's whoever owns the place calls the shots. There isn't a lot of an incentive for people to borrow a lot of money to run things democratically. But when they do, they operate as well as any other business. There are many examples of this. So one thing to look into is the worker co-op movement, worker self-directed enterprises. Those are little examples of how it is that workers can run economic production on a small scale. On a larger scale, things like labor movements being able to set the scale for employment standards, for working standards, for all those sorts of things in ways that are accountable to employees, so it's not just the owner calling the shots in your day-to-day life as an employee, as a consumer, as a resident of some place where a factory operates and spews chemicals into the ground.
Yeah, if I could just, I interrupted this context, and Walter was at our presentation a couple of days ago. We have the Progressive Coalition, by the way, was started as a joint project of the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee and the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. So, I mean, the origins are very close. And we have two campaigns that directly respond to the concerns here. One is we have a campaign to create worker cooperatives. And we had a presentation at Old Babylon Town Hall just this past Monday for an ongoing project, which is in the process of hopefully of creating worker cooperatives on Long Island. And secondly, we produced, we actually gave birth to the Jobs with Justice. I was at the board meeting of the Jobs with Justice, which is a coordination at the Long Island Federation of Labor this morning, planning and dealing, for example, with and there's a lot to talk about in terms of the immigration stuff, which I won't go into. So anyway, there are many organizations involved in these coordinated efforts. I don't want to take anything away from the fantastic and sophisticated work that you're all doing, all right?
But this is part of a fantastically growing movement. And I think your question is to the right point. How do you democratize an economy and a society in a way which maintains the democracy, the accountability? That's a challenge. There are a lot of dimensions to it. I don't want to, it's not my show to talk any further about it, so I'll leave it to other questions.
I just wanted to say one last thing on this, because I think a lot of us have been talking around this, but a lot of us have been basically talking around the ideas of the economist and also communist Richard Wolff, who has an organization called Democracy at Work, which promotes exactly the same kind of thing we're talking about, worker-run directed enterprise. Some of my phrasing actually in my PowerPoint is stolen recklessly and shamelessly from him. What to produce, how to produce, and, but the other thing I wanted to say about him is part of his idea, to answer the first part of your question, is that if you have an economy that is primarily worker-directed enterprises, then capitalism just sort of fades away the same way that once you started having things produced by capitalists as opposed to by, lords on manors running things, then feudalism just sort of died away. That's kind of his idea. You can believe that to whatever extent that you want, but that is kind of one way that promoting workplace democracy can sort of slowly supplant capitalism.
Comments, questions? A question about ICE. Now, in practically any governmental system, certain entities of government can be used abusively. And that's what we see with ICE. And I certainly do not sympathize with ICE at all, but I'm also looking at the practicality. I think of this coming election, the midterm elections, and I think it's absolutely critical. I think everybody in here would agree. It's absolutely critical that we flip at least one of the two branches of Congress, or we're really in deep shit, to put it honestly. And we're like Germany 1933 right now. It's kind of ironic that that's a more democratic country at this time than we are. But anyway, my point is we need to win to bring over a large group of people to the center or preferably over to the left. And politics involves compromise, and I think sometimes you have to compromise on some of your ideals or principles. And what I have seen, there's an indication that if you talk about abolishing ICE, you lose certain people. And I think I have a problem with that. I sympathize completely with your feelings about ICE, but there's a practical issue there, and I wonder if you could address that.
Okay, I'm going to repeat something that Chuck Schumer said in 2016. You see, for every racist that Trump gets, or for every racist mill worker in the Midwest that we lose to Trump, we're going to get two country Republicans from the center. And that didn't work out too well, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is that this country is polarized as all get out. And if you want to win elections right now, the numbers are pretty clear. It's turn out your base and fuck the other guy. And at the end of the day, we cannot win over the center with much of anything, right? We could say, oh, we don't want to abolish ICE, we just want diet ICE. And those people still wouldn't come over to our side. We win by having a clear message that addresses people's problems, right? I mean, there's a reason all of us here, for the most part, are younger, and it's because our generation grew up in basically an economic hellscape where we were told, oh, get 9 degrees and maybe you'll get out of debt peonage by the time you're 50, right? And I say, fuck that. I'm done with that. I'm not interested in that. None of us are interested in that. And at the end of the day, if the Democrats want to run themselves into oblivion by trying to tack to the center like they have for the past 10 years over Obama and lost 1,000 seats, that's their business, but it's not our business.
No, I think that I'm not speaking of tacking to the center. Definitely, I'm glad that I understand that the Democratic Party in Huntington is moving to the left. I think that's very good. But the problem is when you use a term like abolish ICE, immediately a lot of people will reject that. They're in denial about some of the things, and I think we have to try somehow to win them over, and then hopefully educate them further after we've won them over. And I think sometimes appealing more to selfish interests, as bad as it is to appeal solely to selfish interests, sometimes that's something that needs to be used. And I think if we speak about medical care, for example, we need to couch that very often as a selfish interest.
Look, I just got to be really blunt about one thing. That's the Democratic Party's business. We're not an entity of the Democratic Party. We're an independent activist organization. So if abolish ICE is a bad message for a Democratic Party politician, they're free to punch left. We're not a party running a candidate for a line. We're a socialist organization aiming for the liberation of humanity. You said before we're in the 1930s in Weimar, Germany, except we already have a Gestapo. It's called ICE. It's called Customs and Borders Patrol. I'm going to say abolish it every day until it's abolished. And if that's a bad message for Democrats, they don't have to repeat it. That's not my problem. My problem is the fact that we have baby jails. We have an orphaning service on the border. And I'm not going to shut up about that. And if that's a bad message for Democrats, that's Democrats' business. I'm not here to run a ballot line for somebody else. I'm here to tell the truth.
We are the Democratic Socialists of America. We are not the Democratic Party. We are two completely different entities. We do not have a ballot line. We're not running candidates, although we do endorse candidates, and we will contribute to the re-election or election of candidates that are doing the right thing.
I also think it's worth saying that one of the dark little secrets that we're just kind of dancing around is no one knows how to win elections. And I think that, because if the Democratic Party did know how to win elections, then we wouldn't be dealing in the hellscape we're currently living in. So it's worth saying that at the very least, we're having success with talking with moral clarity about things that we really believe, rather than compromising up front and saying, maybe we're going to focus group this and work and make sure we don't have too polarizing of a message. On the other, we think that people will be attracted to the earnestness and the realness of our actual policy positions, as opposed to preemptively walking it back, which has kind of been the Democratic Party strategy since forever.
You want to keep that strategy up.
There was a political cartoon that I saw recently and had an airplane, and it was two airplanes side to side, and one plane had politics, in the rest of the world, left and right. And in America, it just had left and then right. Basically, the right wing and the left wing, as normally attributed political spectrums in this country, are actually both very far to the center and to the right. So when it comes, and this has been a thing that's been going on really since, the 1980s. Margaret Thatcher famously, said what was the most successful thing of her administration, and she said New Labour. And, that was in the United Kingdom, that was, their version of the Democratic Party went to the right. It was the same thing with New Democrats over here back in the 90s, with Bill Clinton and Al Gore. They moved to the right on many different issues like Social Security, there's famous Social Security reform, and to immigration, tough on immigrants, which led to a lot of the situations that we have here where we're basically running, concentration camps down at the border. We have border security that actively engages in, making sure that immigrants who cross the border don't make it, be it they turn around or, regrettably and sadly enough, that they just may die out in the desert, because that's just what our immigration policy has been leading to. So I think that as a socialist organization, we have to, say that ICE, which has only been around since, I think, 2003, it's relatively new as an organization. Okay. Right, exactly. So we don't need it. We've existed for over 200 years. We don't need ICE as an organization. And when they say, oh, our borders, what about them? It's there is border security down there already, and they're already doing, their job, albeit a way I don't approve of and a way I would like to see reformed, but they're still down there. And ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement as an organization, does not need to be around, and we do not need to be campaigning on the right with the Democratic Party on that either.
add something kind of a little nerdy. So I'm the oldest person up here, and when the so I was interested in the DSA when I was in graduate school in the early 90s, and there really wasn't an opportunity to really grow a DSA chapter. And one of the things that we don't talk about why is the Cold War. We could not have an event like this in the 70s, 80s, or 90s without being red-baited. And even in the early 2000s without being red-baited, right? And so this was serious. I mean, people lost their livelihoods, they lost their friends, they lost their families. And what we lost was the whole structure and organization and organizing know-how on the left. And so that vacuum then was filled by a number of different things, and some of them good, some of them not so good, and the shift ever rightward happened as a consequence. Enter Occupy, and whatever you want to say about the success or failure of Occupy Wall Street and the movements that spawned it, right, the Arab Spring and then Black Lives Matter coming after, what Occupy did, a few things. One was that it kind of reinvigorated this sense that social media is great, but bodies, boots on the ground, and bodies in public space. And I should add, I'm a professor of rhetoric and public advocacy at Hofstra. I also teach labor history, and I study social movements and efforts to soapbox orators and efforts for free speech activism on the history of that on the left. So what Occupy did then was to legitimate again the tactic of taking space and making claims that are rooted in calls for economic equality. And it opened up again a space for the language of class in politics, which we didn't have. And the expression "we are the 99% was rhetorically brilliant because you cannot co-opt it. So Black Lives Matter is a terrific movement, problematic language, because you can co-opt it and say blue lives matter, all lives matter, right? And we can talk about the nefarious politics behind those, but rhetorically, the language is open to co-optation. We are the 99% is not, and language matters, and tactics matter, right? And so, yeah, the 2016 election gives birth to the resurgence of the DSA, but so does Occupy, and so does the end of the Cold War. Right? Most people on this side of the table understand what I mean. You just couldn't talk this way before the end of the Cold War. What I think Abolish ICE does on that vein is, if we keep saying it, and I applaud my comrades up here, and I get goosebumps when I hear Jordan say, I'm not going to stop saying that. The more people say that, the more it gets legitimated as a policy position. So we don't have to get people elected, but we have to say that, not just because we believe it, but because the more we say it, the more you can say it, because it becomes a common refrain. I mean, who would have thought that there's going to be a caucus of Democrats in the Congress rallying behind the expression and the policy Medicare for all, right? We now even actually know what that means. So language matters, and we say it not just because we believe it, but because the more we say it, the more everyone else hears it, and the more we normalize it, naturalize it, and we make it into a hegemonic position.
I kind of feel like it becomes a stopping point if you don't talk about also abolishing Customs and Border Patrol, abolishing the entire Department of Homeland Security, and eventually abolishing borders and allowing human beings to move freely over the earth. Also, Black Lives Matter.
Other comments or questions? Comments, questions, observations? Yes?
How do I sign up to do the taillight repair?
Sign up on the clipboard.
Okay, that's all I need to do.
What is your name?
Amelia.
Okay, Amelia, we will personally make a note to that, make sure to invite you to that event.
Nassau's coming to that event.
Woohoo!
There have been so many taillight stops in Nassau.
Other questions or comments? Yes?
I'm British. The Labour Department moved to the right because they discovered there was no way they could win with their policies. And as my father always said to me, the first thing you have to do is get a job. Then you can work on your policies. But unless you can get elected, you're just wasting your time. It's just all right.
Well, there was a little man in Britain at the moment named Jeremy Corbyn. Who is,
I'm sorry.
Well,
I'm Labour. My father was a union man, but Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, the reason I bring him up is because in many ways he's like a very close analog to our Bernie Sanders over here. In
No,
that
he's
he's
not. No, he's not.
In this specific sense of he advocated a position that was significantly to the left of the mainstream of his party, and then mounted a very credible bid that ultimately ended in flames. But setting that aside for a moment. Yeah, I mean, we can.
Right now, the Labour Party is up 5 percentage points over the
Right.
Conservatives in the polls.
Well, we can argue about, you know, he almost won a rigged election, but at the end of the day, he lost. But
Conservatives are so unpopular. It doesn't mean that Labour is popular.
It's all relative. It all matters, and following your line of argument, what matters is not whether they're popular, but whether they get more votes. But anyway,
And I would vote Labour.
Yeah.
To be quite honest, if I was over Britain, my father would turn over in his grave if I voted Conservative. But I am not a Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, the one other thing that I would like to say on that is what was tried in the 90s worked in the 90s. And we are in a new generation with a lot of new people voting who've grown up in the economic just desperation of the Great Recession that never really ended. You know, official figures may say one thing, but anyone here who's tried to get a job and has found, like, you know, places that need a master's degree for 60 hours at $10 an hour will tell you that it never really ended in any significant sense. And so it might be the case that, you know, if we were running in the 1990s, then these kinds of policies would just be destroyed. But we think that the kinds of policies and the kinds of things that we're advocating fit very well for our current time and our current situation.
The one thing I would like to say about Corbyn, by the way, which I find extremely exciting, is the extent to which he's taken the model of the city of Preston as a model for economic development, which is community development, working cooperatives. And he's working very closely with the Democracy Collaborative of the United States to offer a very really a democratic conception of the reconstruction of the economy, which is what has, I think, got the Economist magazine and friends frightened out of hell. But I mean, that is totally different from the history of the British Labour Party, and it's totally different from the history of the institutional left across the world. Right? It is precisely an effort, whether it works or not depends on whether or not he gets into power and can begin to implement it. But the vision is quite different. It's not top down. And you want to look into it, look at the city of Preston and see what they've done.
Yeah, I'm from Manchester.
Okay, all right. Well, Preston was a totally depressed area until fairly recently, and they've undergone a significant transformation, and it's partially of a model. It's all about the Preston model, but it's really something that John McDonnell, the shadow economic secretary there, has been promoting and Corbyn supporting. I think it's fascinating, extremely exciting. It's quite different from the history of the British Labour Party.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
What do you see as a possibility if by chance, or miracle, however you want to view it, Corbyn was to get in and take it over, really get there, and same thing with Bernie. Do you see a possibility for a revolution in the world?
I make no such predictions.
No.
I mean, she says something.
How about you guys?
She says something which is extremely insightful. She said, "We haven't figured out how to win elections." I'm just saying that it is fascinating and extremely exciting to see the Labour Party in Britain exploring and promoting a grassroots, bottom-up democratic vision of reconstruction of the economy. What that would mean for Britain, I cannot say, and I'm certainly not going to talk about what that would mean for the world. I'm not sure, about worldwide socialism in a kind of instantaneous sense. I have no idea.
I want to really, really quickly address the idea that if you don't get the right people into office, you're not going to go anywhere, or if you don't get elected, you're not going to go anywhere. I'd actually argue that that's the opposite of the truth. You can get all sorts of people into office, and they can turn on you if you don't have control over them. If they get entrenched in a political system that rewards compromise and careerism and having a message over actually getting things done, the only thing
Barack was going to change stuff.
Who voted for
Hope and change. Was there much hope and change? No.
Obama got some stuff done, but he also turned on a lot of his promises. And we honestly were excited about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but she's made some early signs that she's sort of going mainstream and abandoning some of her roots. We don't know whether she will entirely, but this depends on movements to keep politicians honest. So just as a quick question, which president established the EPA?
I know the answer to this.
Who's that?
Richard Nixon.
Is Richard Nixon a tree hugger? If Richard Nixon doesn't strike me as a tree hugger, so why would he have established the EPA? Here's another question. How exactly is it that the Democratic Party went from the party of established white supremacy and disenfranchising black voters to the champion of black voting rights in the 60s? It wasn't because of voting the right people into office, because black people couldn't vote throughout the South. It took activism outside of electoral politics. How did women get the vote? They couldn't elect people into office. The most dramatic political changes don't happen just by getting someone into office. It happens by having a movement that makes it impossible to avoid change. At that point, the politicians must do what you say. That's another example of why I say that democracy is not just voting for leaders periodically. You have to vote for the leaders, but you also have to keep them honest. You also have to make sure they're accountable to you and they can't ignore you. And if you forget that, then you're just going to have another person telling you what you want to hear and then betraying it.
The best example of that, by the way, is the current Republican Party.
The what?
The current Republican Party.
The Tea Party. It really is. Like,
No,
I feel like the Tea Party is just an evil version of that, where they kept them in there and they had pressure to keep them up. So they did it for evil.
They're scared to hell about their base. So that's a support for you.
I see what you mean, yes.
This gentleman had his hand raised for 20
minutes.
minutes. Yeah, and then you want to go, Terry.
I hate to be a party pooper, but nevertheless.
They always have to have one at least. Go for it.
It was, I lived in socialist Yugoslavia for 23 years. We had pretty much everything that you are dreaming about it in your little, point. And it failed. And I'll tell you, in my opinion, why this is. Income inequality is measured by Gini index. I don't know if you guys know about it. Gini index of 100 in a country means, winner takes it all, and the losers are finished, they have nothing. Gini index of 0, everybody is being paid, the same. In Russian, if anybody knows Russian, it's uravnilovka. Everybody gets the same. We in America now, we have 40, our Gini index is 46, which is pretty high. Scandinavians are having in the 20s. So if you agree with me, the Scandinavians are next best to your, dream, I guess we are 20 points apart from them. How do you break that, schism between the, us?
Rich.
Well, either we are going to have a revolution, or we are going to wait for 100 years until everybody gets educated and be kind to each other.
Can I quickly respond to that? So, you said you had all those things in the former Yugoslavia, but you also had a police state, you also had, secret prisons, you had a secret police, you had... It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad, but it wasn't genuinely democratic.
Tito died, that's the problem.
It was really bad. It's not that bad.
We have a historian.
I think one of the, and this is kind of address some of the questions that were raised before. I think one of the problems, and I'm looking at, and forgive me, of course, the age group, so this will resonate with many of us. One of the big problems of the left in the 20th century is that in this country, is that we've always looked for models outside, right? So for a long time it was the Soviet Union. That did not work out very well. Then, the socialist democracy, the democratic socialist democracies in Eastern Europe, that did not work out very well. We're always looking for something outside of our own borders, of outside of our own experiences that we could kind of latch on to. And some of the questions today pointed to that same kind of attitude. I think one of the really exciting things about the Democratic Socialists of America is that it's an American-born, created, and rooted movement. So, does it have all the answers to all the questions that you're raising? Most certainly not. But clearly, in the solutions that it will find, they're deeply rooted in a knowledge, most importantly in a care, in a sincere commitment to improving the lives of our neighbors, of the people that live within our communities, of our fellow citizens and not. So it really is a very, very rooted, it's a movement that is rooted in the history, in the tradition, in the culture of reform and radicalism in this country. And I think rather than looking or trying to find outside models, we have plenty good revolutionary models in this country that go all the way back to the American Revolution. How many of you remember the slogan, communism is 20th century Americanism?
Does it count if you remember reading it in a book?
Okay, all right. But anyhow, I think it's very, very important that we kind of not try to find and engage in debates over what works in this country or what works in that other country, and really think that we have a solid tradition of radicalism in this country that we could latch onto, and that we can build a truly revolutionary, socialist, democratic American movement.
And if you come to our reading group meetings, you can learn more about that radical tradition.
Can I say one other thing on this question before?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I just wanted to, because I don't want it to make it seem like we're just skimming over all of the dangers of like the Soviet-style communism because we're an American organization. How could that possibly happen here? I don't want to make it sound like we're ignoring that, but the one thing that I would say is that as DSA members, we want to look at socialist experiments in the past, where they succeeded, where they failed, where we might want to replicate them, or where we might want to throw it out entirely, and also that when it comes to new systems, to use a bit of history, even though I'm not a historian, for about 100 years in Europe after the French Revolution, any kind of democratic impulse was destroyed by pointing at the French Revolution. Look how badly that turned out. You can't possibly have a republic because it'll turn into Napoleon. And I think that we need to avoid making that same kind of fallacy here, because just because we've had some bad things that call themselves socialist doesn't mean that any socialist kind of thing that we do is necessarily going to turn into, Joseph Stalin.
I mean, we've had free and fair elections with universal suffrage in most of the Western world for less than 100 years. I mean, Jordan, I think you have a story about when you teach the Civil War. It really was more of a war of, is representative democracy going to survive? Because everywhere else it's been crushed.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that conservative forces throughout the world, in the 1860s, if you wanted to point to an example of a representative democratic government, you had France, which had a revolution, imploded into an empire, became a monarchy again, tried to be a republic, had a revolution, imploded into an empire again, and had the United States, which proclaimed itself the land of liberty and equality and kept chattel slavery, and then was splitting up, going into war over it. All sorts of conservatives say, democracy, like in the United States? They could do that all day. And it's just a matter of looking at saying, just because experiments have happened and haven't worked out doesn't mean that the ideal doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that we can't learn from mistakes and try something that works.
I don't know exactly what will work, but I know what will not work. And that is supporting the Democratic or Republican parties. Because what history has shown, like when the Conservative Party started and they shifted the Republican Party to the right, the Democrats followed them right over there. And now Trump and the Koch brothers are shifting the Republican Party to the right. And the leadership of the Democratic Party is trying to prevent any Sanders or any liberal Democrats from even running in primaries. So I say that contribute to the Democratic Socialists of America, contribute to anything. The Green Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, anything except the Democratic and the Republican. And it would help also if you stop watching the boob tube and those idiots who mouth government propaganda all the time and start getting your information somewhere else. Thank you.
Just a comment. How many decades will it take to make a change? How many decades will we have to suffer?
In 2
No,
years,
I think the DSA. I think the DSA.
Only by way of the Democratic Party, they can go over the state senate.
The way our politics, the way our political system is now structured, we do have two major parties, and we can't start another third or fourth without doing damage to one or both. What we need to do is for the DSA to, in fact, engage with one of the parties, probably the Democratic Party, and force them to the left.
enforce them. Because what would happen is if you keep telling the people how bad the Democratic Party is, how inadequate it is, you're gonna win, but there'll be some voters who are gonna leave. And you've just now made the problem more difficult.
Well, that's why we have an inside-outside strategy. So we do have people who are running for their own local ED to represent their election district within the Democratic Party. We also have people who are running for office on the Democratic Party ballot, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We also have Julia Salazar running in New York City. We have people running on the Democratic Party ballot.
Don't pay attention, forget it.
So that's our inside strategy. And then we have the outside strategy where there are people who choose not to engage with the Democratic Party electorally and push on the outside to keep holding them accountable and keep pushing them further left. Jabari Brisport, who ran on the Green Party line, and what, did he win?
No, he got 30%.
He got 30%? Okay, that's great. Speaking of the Green Party, FYI, Howie Hawkins is running for governor on the Green Party ballot line, and while we have not endorsed his campaign because he's probably not viable, if the Green Party gets 50,000 votes within the state, then the Green Party gets to keep the ballot line. So if you are somebody who cares about having a third party, just something to consider. Not PSA at all, just me personally.
But you can't do that without instant no voting. Until we institute that, the Green Party is going to bite into the Democratic Party, and it's going to make matters worse.
So then join our electoral working group and then help us push for election reform here in New York State so that we can have ranked choice voting.
Yeah, but it's pretty obvious, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, I personally have a slate of things I would like to see: instant runoff voting. I personally like mandatory voting, although I recognize that's controversial. Abolishing the Electoral College. There's a bunch of things that we would like to do.
Free snacks if you vote.
have election day be a holiday would be a big one of mine too. But there's a lot of things that we can do that we think would make the country more democratic, like even at the ballot box, which we don't even think is the be-all end-all of politics, but we still think that the way we currently run elections is kind of a sham, and that there's a laundry list of different things we could do to make it significantly more fair and equitable.
I wanted to respectfully disagree with you on the Green Party thing, because I think they're one of the most destructive forces of the state. Let me explain why. Okay? But you're suggesting the reason why. We're not talking about the long-term future. I mean, what the Green Party systematically does is it basically runs candidates to the left of, not only the Democratic Party, but the Working Families Party, right, to drain votes from both of those. But it refuses to participate in a constructive policy, and it's accomplished absolutely nothing. It had nothing to do with fracking, for example, because it is irrelevant politically. And it's irrelevant because it refuses to engage in policies because it's conceptually purist. It will not relate to or deal with any candidate who takes any money from any corporation. That's its ideological purity. So it functions then, like for example, in the race for the state senate, taking over the state senate for the Democrats, is absolutely crucial to single payer or any other progressive legislation. It doesn't guarantee it because a lot of the Democrats have to be pushed. In your analysis about what's needed to have a mass movement and how you push the policy, that's true. But you're not going to do that with a Republican control of the state senate. So what does the Green Party do? It runs candidates ideologically more pure than, let's say, Todd Kaminsky, who replaced Dean Skelos. They did that. They ran a candidate. It was absolutely irrelevant, but it drains votes. Fortunately, they're so impotent that the amount of votes they drain were insignificant. But it can be significant. Right? And in fact, it is no possibility of accomplishing anything positive. It is a possibility of destroying something. They do not spend any time criticizing Republicans, and they do not spend any time building any kind of effective political coalition or movement. They won't work with other organizations because they are just purer than pure. So their de facto significance is precisely to be a vehicle. And by the way, they get encouragement and support from the Republican Party because the Republicans know that this is a great way to drain votes from the Democrats in potentially significant races. So it is a fool's errand to take seriously the fact Howie Hawkins, with whom I talked and discussed this issue, has always the best program. There is no question about that. When you're irrelevant and impotent, you can say anything you want and you can have a great program. They have no political influence, but they do drain votes. So from my point of view,
we would be better off if they didn't get their 50,000 votes, but they will get them, and they will be on the line. But the problem is, how do you engage in politics which makes an effective change? Part of what you do is you have to build a movement to push the people and hold them accountable. Absolutely.
95% of it.
Well, it's not 95%. That's vastly optimistic. But whatever it be, okay.
83.5.
But the second question is how you then leverage your capacity of power. That's the challenge. All right. Yeah. All right. Come back down.
This guy's had his hand up for a while.
All right. You go ahead.
A couple of points to make. I'm a member of the baby boomer generation, the generation that inherited the world's richest legacy and left you with penury and declining life expectancy and all those good things. The generation of sociopaths, I believe it was accurately portrayed as. Yes. So I'm going to suggest, first of all, I want to congratulate you guys and tell you that I truly appreciate your passion, your focus, and your resolve. And it's encouraging. I have to say this. I came tonight not expecting to hear these things. It is truly encouraging.
Thank you.
I have to say this about my generation. Please be wary of any baby boomer who cautions you and tries to urge incrementalism. Please don't do that. And I'm reminded of a time in my life where we all get there, but my dad, unfortunately, it was time I had to take the keys away from him. And it was with heavy heart that I did that. But I have to say to you, your generation, it is time for your generation to take the keys away from my generation.
Dictatorship of the teen.
It is. And you guys, it does, it falls to you. And I would just urge that you continue to move. One last point, John Maynard Keynes, this whole approach to incrementalism, in the long run, we're all dead. So keep that in mind, please. Time is ticking. It is time for change. Reject out of hand all this corporate-funded, focus group-tested rhetoric that tries to perpetuate the status quo. Please do that and move forward for fundamental change from the ground up. And thank you.
Something before on the topic of, past examples of socialist states and, failed attempts and those kind of things. There was a mention before of Professor Richard Wolff. On that topic, I think of something. There's something he says about how it's like what society at large, like transitioning from one system to another, is never going to take like even just like 10, 20 years. And the Russian Revolution was only like 100 years ago, which isn't really that much time in the grand scheme of things, and that the transition from like feudalism to capitalism took quite more time than that. So that's just something I think about from time to time on that topic, and I don't think, the failures of the Soviet Union, or now the big one is Venezuela, just the word Venezuela has become a counter-argument. That's why just something I think about when they bring up those past failures of socialist states to discourage people from, raising their voices in favor of any other kind of positive change for the future.
One thing to keep in mind whenever we talk about the timelines here, it was over 100 years between the English Civil War and the French Revolution. And the English Civil War basically did all the things the French Revolution did. They killed the king, they brought about a parliamentary republic, there was radicalism of all sorts, and yet it's almost completely forgotten. We're just sort of like, oh, that, it never happened. But at the end of the day, perhaps 300 years from now, we're going to think the same thing about the Russian Revolution. We're like, oh yeah, that thing that happened, and it didn't really work out, but it was like an interesting experiment. But now we have the fully automated gay-space luxury communism, and it's great.
I just want to respond to him very quickly. So, we point to the Soviet Union as like the first attempt to really get what we understand as socialism into practice. Now, obviously, there was a lot of bad examples of like what happened. But to put it into context, you're talking about a peasant society in 1917 that was devastated by, the First World War. And then he talked about not even 20 years later, devastated again by even worse conflict, which was World War II, where you lost up to 30 million lives. And in less than, and within a generation, they were the second superpower only to the United States. The socialism that was there in the Soviet Union was able to turn a peasant society into a country that could be on par with the United States, a superpower, both industrially, educationally, just all these different things. So, and it did fail. It collapsed, but that was the first attempt. But it failed not only because of internal problems that it had, but it also had problems with like the entire capitalist world system that was also working to undermine it and to crush it, Winston Churchill, the famous, prime minister said about the Russian Revolution, let's, smother this thing while it's still in the cradle so it doesn't get out, because that's what they wanted. They wanted to get rid of this entity that was going to threaten their world order, and it failed in 1992 where it just dissolved and everything. But I believe that what we're doing now in the ashes of, the Soviet Union and the example that it's helped bring out in the last 100 years is that we learned from those lessons, as other people have mentioned on this panel, and we can create something wholly unique, as a socialist experiment for the United States. Will we trip up? Of course we will. Will we do something as horrendous as Stalin and his plans? Absolutely not. I do not believe that at all. But I do believe that we can make something wholly unique for our country that is different and much better than the capitalist system we have now.
People talk about Venezuela a lot, but they do not talk about Bolivia. And it's very strange to me because Bolivia has a similar socialist party in power to Venezuela, and it's not a basket case. And it almost goes along with what you just said. It's almost like there's something more going on in these countries than has or does not have socialism. Almost like there's a much larger global and historical context. It's worth paying attention to in these sort of propaganda efforts. That's all I want to say.
Yes?
I wonder if we shouldn't be talking about what's happening in our country right now. There's nothing wrong with this theoretical discussion. And this is the first time I've come here, and maybe that is what you do. But the separation of the children from their parents, that's a criminal act. Who's responsible? And why is no one being taken to court for that? And the emoluments that they're beginning to look at now. There's so much happening that's so dangerous and so close to what was happening in Germany during the 30s that we really have to talk about what can we do now against this. And not worry about whether we're going to have a perfect utopia.
August 12th, Washington, D.C., Unite the Right 2 is happening, and we're going to face them down. So if you want something to stop fascism right away, the fascists are reorganizing, and we're going to, at the least, give them a little tap, a love tap, so to speak.
So what about August 12th?
August 12th.
It's the anniversary of Unite the Right.
The Charlottesville.
They're having
The anniversary of when they killed someone, they're celebrating it.
Yeah, they have a rally planned in Washington, D.C., and there's a mobilization to stop it. So if you're worried about this being Weimar Germany, 1933, well, there's a direct connection right there. And
It isn't Weimar Germany, but it's ugly and it's dangerous and it's getting worse.
I also think it's worth saying that when it comes to fascism, and I really appreciate that we're using the F word here. When it comes to fascism, what Germany shows and what Italy shows and what every country that has had a fascist period shows is that liberalism won't save us. And that's part of why DSA has had such a surge in membership recently, because it is socialist solutions that are the real, the only hope of countering
Excuse me,
fascism.
what stopped the fascist movements in Europe was the war. Right?
Yeah, you went to war. That's the point I'm making.
But we don't want to go to war. How can we do this without throwing atom bombs around?
So here's what I'm going to say about this, because I appreciate what you're saying, and that it seems like a lot of what we're talking about is historical models, ideals we'd like to see, but what does that have to do with the on-the-ground corruption and violations of rights that are happening right now? I hear that completely. What it has to do is with the fact that, unfortunately, the way these things progress, people are going to get used to it. And so talking about Russia and corruption and Trump is bad on TV, people are eventually going to get desensitized to it, even if it's all true. And I think a lot of it is true, and I think he's an incredibly corrupt president. I really do feel like it's important to go after him, which is why it is that I think it's very important to promote an alternative positive vision. As you just said, just saying business as usual, just saying let's get back to civility and responsible government, that's the sort of liberal compromise solution. We want to get back to the normalcy of the Obama days. I don't think we're going to be able to do that. I think the only way that we can fight the corruption and malfeasance and rights violations that are going on right now is by rallying people around a vision, an alternative of something new and something that is going to promise a better life for everybody, and not just say let's get back to normal, because normal failed. And it failed in the 30s and it's going to fail now.
Other comments or questions? There's a lively discussion. It's great. Yes.
Can I say something? I'm one of those that should be keyless. And I've been attending the meetings. I'm a member actually of the Nassau County Democratic Socialists. And one of the things I've been going there is I've really kept my mouth shut. I've really, because in fact, as you pointed out, I think my sentiment has always been that I've been active since I was
Young.
And a long time ago. But one of the things that really impresses me is this real sense, this is not an organization of people who spend time complaining about Trump. And I think we're all good at doing that. That's an easy thing to do. They are really focusing on addressing the structural problems that we are encountering and that we are dealing with and we have been dealing with for a long, long time. And that I really, really appreciate, because in fact, it's more than a discussion group. It's more than just a group of people who exchange interesting posts on Facebook. They truly are committed to bringing about change where they can, and with the limited resources that the organization has at its disposal in the locations where they work. So we can spend a lot of time talking about models, we can spend a lot of time talking about failed historical experiments, and we can certainly talk a lot about the current inhabitant in the White House. But what this organization does, it really believes in activism. It really believes in boots on the ground, doing things right away now in our communities that have a direct impact on us and our neighbors. And I think that's very, very important, built around ideals that we all share. And I think that's really, I'm not exactly sure why you came here. I'm glad everybody came, and I'm not exactly sure. This is not a criticism. I don't know what you were hoping to get out of an event such as this. But it's one of the, I guess, the soon-to-be keyless people in this movement. I tell you that this movement has a lot to offer, and whatever support you can provide would be very much appreciated.
Yeah.
Did you want to follow up on something there?
No, I think my question is answered. My objection is, it's not an objection.
It's a concern, and I think it's well answered by his comments. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the silver tsunami, because to me that's the whole idea of the keyless. You know, the keyless moving in a direction that can help by perhaps the famous words that, if you can't get out of the new way if you can't lend your hand. And I think that's what we really need. And that's beyond incremental. That's saying young people can do it, will do it, and with the help of older people who can assist them, that's what we should be doing. But unfortunately, we like to rubber stamp what we've done before, and we are attracted to people in our age groups. Not me personally, I'm too crazy for that. But that's normally the way it goes. And I think that that has to be a commitment, and I think the silver tsunami is a beautiful way of segueing into that.
So we talked a lot about generational divides. We talked about a lot about generational flagellation, about who's at fault for thing. Are the millennials rotten kids? Are the boomers really selfish? Boomers, Gen X, millennials, whatever. there are people who are suffering, marginalized, and oppressed in every single age category, and it's the capitalists who are to blame. So I just want to say, we love our elder comrades. We love you all because you have a lot of wealth of experience, and because if you're retired, you got time in your hands. So if you want to join up and help us out, we'd be glad to have you.
Yeah, I appreciate your stirring words earlier and giving us the rubber stamp from across this, what I would call illusory, like, generational divide. Age is a number, whatever. But I have some bad news. You're not off the hook. Like, it's not just our job as the young people to change the world because you've been sitting on your ass, or you've been complicit in supporting the yuppie generation, or
Fight cards.
yeah.
So we got the good cop and the bad cop.
No, I'm a child of yuppies, so
You're gonna have to wrap this up only because we have to be out.
Anyway, yeah.
So let's have a summation and we
We
can.
do love our elder comrades, and we invite you to join us. It's Bernie. Yeah, how old is Bernie?
He's not even a baby boomer. He's before that.
He's
79.
He's he's what they call the lost generation.
That's me.
Yeah.
Lost generation.
So there's anyone of any age, of any whoever you are is going to find a place in this movement. Yeah, so
We're not opposed to a little grain of our movement.
yeah.
Just, I do agree that there is some, there's some responsibility that has to be held by members of a generation for other members, especially if you're complicit or something you didn't maybe act as well. Speaking for myself, it was only a few years ago that, I'll admit this to the room, I actually voted for Mitt Romney because I was a Republican at that time. And I changed my... Shame. No, but what happened was that I changed my political positions, my political beliefs, and my understanding, and I learned. And now what I'm trying to do is that, even though I was only around to make those decisions for only a short time, that was still very bad, and the beliefs that I expanded were very terrible. And what we can try to do, not just for myself and my own generation, but also you guys as well, is work together to, for lack of better words, make up for what happened and work toward bettering tomorrow. Because, this is all hands on deck. We need everybody's, wealth of knowledge and experience, boots on the ground to really get this done. Whatever you can contribute to help to this end, that's what we need, because, the capitalists, they're going to use everything they got. And the only thing that we have in spades are numbers. That's what we have, and that's what we need to throw at them, because together, united, we win.
And just real quick, in 50 years, if we're not living under socialism, we're going to be living underwater. So it's kind of urgent, so we don't want to push anybody
Is there anybody else who wanted to give us their contribution?
One of the things